Well, the top economic officials from the world's top two economies have pledged to talk more. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He met in Zurich for their first ever face-to-face meeting. Both officials sounding a similar note, that above all else, communication is key to containing their nation's rivalry. Ms. Yellen opened discussions with a strong message that both countries must communicate on financial matters, given the rough global economic outlook. She says they share responsibility to manage their differences and prevent conflict. The Chinese vice premier echoed that sentiment. Liu He says the superpowers should always maintain dialogue, no matter the circumstances. He also pointed out the need for deeper communication on many issues ranging from the economy to climate change. And for more on this, Lo Minmin joins us live from Shanghai. Minmin, what are the priorities for both Liu He and Janet Yellen in this face-to-face meeting?
This is a closed-door meeting, and the Chinese side has not yet released any official statement on the outcome of the meeting just yet. But we do know that it's the first in-person meeting between the two senior officials, and that's a big deal because China has pretty much cancelled most high-level communications with the U.S. ever since former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. And so this is a sign of commitment that the two sides are honoring the pledge made by President Joe Biden and Xi Jinping when they met on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali last November. The two countries have been clashing over a range of issues from Taiwan to trade policy to human rights. But of course, top of the agenda in Davos would be the global economic headwinds and the potential for a global economic recession and how to enhance cooperation on that, because China is already feeling the effects of that with falling exports on the back of weak external demand from the US and Europe. And so Liu is likely to encourage Yellen to push for the lifting of U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods. And there is a lot of uncertainty for the U.S. as well, because we know that Liu He, along with other senior Chinese officials, are likely to step down in the next in March when the Chinese annual parliamentary session meets. And so Yellen is likely to quiz Liu on the state of the Chinese economy and the direction of its future economic policy and whether the new leadership team is going to give full play to the private sector. Now, the timing of this meeting is also important because it comes on the eve of Yellen's three-country visit to Africa that comes right on the heel of the Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang's visit to Africa as well. So these two countries back-to-back visit to Africa, both sides vying for influence in the region. Yellen has been publicly criticizing China for what it sees as a form of debt diplomacy and has been calling for China to restructure its debt to some of the world's poorest countries.
Speaking of China's worries, Minmin, of course, at the WF, we're hearing lots of interest about the concerning COVID-19 surge within China. Of course, the Spring Festival or the Chinese New Year just days away. Is there a sense of dread in China, or are authorities confident they can contain this surge?
Well, we have been seeing a lot of President Xi Jinping today on the news. He's been busy making New Year greetings via video conference call to a hospital in Heilongjiang, sending his greetings to the frontline workers battling against COVID-19 there. He also made a video conference call to a welfare home for the elderly in Fujian, sending them greetings for a prosperous New Year to the old folks. Clearly, these are very symbolic moves by the president to show that the health of the elderly is on top of his mind this Chinese New Year. Here in Shanghai, we are seeing the city empty out day by day as hundreds of millions of migrants travel back home. A projected 2.1 billion trips to be made this Spring Festival that could be a super spreader event and lead to another wave of peak COVID, especially in the rural areas. And the Transport Ministry has said that this is going to be the most challenging moment for China in recent years because we already saw a run on medical resources in the cities. What more in the countryside where medical infrastructure is not as advanced? China has recently released a comprehensive death toll showing nearly 60,000 people had died in this wave of the pandemic. But experts tell me that still underestimates the extent of the outbreak because it doesn't count those who died outside hospitals, in elder care facilities or at home, especially in rural areas where healthcare is less accessible and people may not have access to rapid antigen test kits. many people may die without ever being diagnosed of COVID-19. So this Chinese New Year is going to be a time for a long-awaited reunion for many families after 3 years of zero COVID, but also a time to mourn for those who lost their lives to this wave of the pandemic.
Thanks so much for joining us. Lo Min Min reporting live just there from Shanghai.